Hello everyone, Namaste, welcome back to my channel. This is Amisha Singh Chauhan, and if you're looking for something fun, dark and mysterious, then you're at the right place. So do not forget to subscribe to my channel. Also hit that bell icon so that every time I'm here with a new case to talk about, you'll get to know about it. So the case we're going to talk about today is famously known as the Tandoor Kand in India. It is a case about jealousy, insecurity, and that 1 minute of rage that changed the lives of two people completely, also the ones around them. It is a case that terrified Delhi so much so that people in Delhi were scared to have tandoori food for almost a year. And if you know about Indians and our cuisines, then you know how much crazy we are. So imagine the kind of impact this case had on people. So without any further ado, let's start and find out what happened on 2nd of July 1995. Constable Abdul Nazir Kunju and Home Guard Chandrapal were on a patrolling duty in Janpad Beat. And that is when around 11:25 p.m. at Ashoka Road they noticed tall leaping flames of fire. Thinking that it could be a start of a major fire, they immediately rushed towards the building, which was Yatri Nivas. They realized that the flames were coming from a restaurant called Bagya Barbecue. Now, when they were trying to enter the restaurant to stop the fire, there was a person standing at the entrance who stopped them from entering the restaurant. He told them that everything was under control and they are just burning old banners and cardboard and posters. Now, when the constable and home guard found this information, they were quite relieved because they were thinking the fire could be because of some sort of an accident. But when they realized that this was a controlled and on purpose fire, they were like, okay, fine. I mean, nothing's going to go wrong from here, right? So they take a step back and they decide to continue their patrolling. Now, within few minutes, they hear a lot of people screaming fire, fire near the restaurant. And that is when they realize that now the flames have gone up to 30 to 35 feet high, which is quite intense, so they again try to enter the restaurant and they again see the same person, and he tells them ki, do not worry, everything is under control, we are just burning normal paper, yada yada yada. But this time the constable and home guard were not taking it. I mean, if they were just burning normal paper, how come the flames were so high? And the fact that he was not allowing them to even enter the restaurant was quite suspicious. Now, the thing is that unfortunately, both of them had forgotten their walkie talkies, and Kunju had to inform a nearest police station to get some sort of help. So he asked Chandrapal to stay over there and take care of the situation while he goes to the nearest police station to alert them about it. Now, when Kunju returns, he realizes the fire has intensified, and if not stopped immediately, then the entire area could be burned down. So he takes Chandrapal with him and he realizes that he can't enter through the main gate because obviously there's that man who's stopping them from entering the restaurant. So they start looking for another entrance. And that is when they come to the rear end of the restaurant. There was a 7 feet tall wall and they jump over it. The moment they come to the garden of the Bagya restaurant, by the way, Bagya in Hindi actually means garden. So when they come to the Bagya restaurant's garden, they see a tandoor. Now, for the ones who don't know what a tandoor is a clay oven which is usually used to make rotis and naan, and it's a staple of Indian cuisine. So, anyways, back to the case. Right in the center of the garden of the Bagya restaurant, they see a tandoor, and over the tandoor, they see that a lot of cardboard, posters, and banners and wooden planks indeed were getting burned. But there was a man standing right next to the tandoor who was stoking the fire instead of stopping it. So Kunju immediately rushes towards this man and he's very angry and he's like, what are you thinking, stoking this fire? Are you trying to burn down the entire city? So the man replies by saying, don't worry, we are Congress workers. We're just burning old posters and banners and everything is under control. Nobody's going to get because of this. Now, if there would have been anybody else, they would have been a little taken aback hearing the name Congress, because Congress, if I'm not wrong, was a leading party at the time and quite a strong one. But Kunju didn't give a second thought to it. He immediately rushed towards the kitchen, and him along with Chandrapal took hold of buckets, filled them with tap water, and started to douse the fire off. Thankfully, by the time other police forces also arrived, and they helped Kunju and Chandrapal in dozing the fire off. They were successful indeed. Now, what they do is they immediately go to the first floor to check if everything was all right because, like I had mentioned earlier, the flames were quite high, like they were really tall. So they were worried what if any sort of cables were burned or some sort of any other things that had gotten fire because of it. But everything was okay, no, nothing else had gotten fire. But what they do notice is from the first floor's balcony, they look down in the garden and they notice that a man in white kurta pajama was stoking the fire again. He had restarted the fire, and this time the flames were really, really tall, like really almost to their head, I would say. He was using a lot of butter and ghee to intensify the fire. Now, Kunju, he thought of nothing. He was like, these people are crazy. They have lost it. And he immediately jumps off from the balcony. Can you imagine? Like, hats off to this guy. Literally, just a moment to be appreciative of his bravery. So, anyways, he jumps off to the ground and he again takes a bucket and starts dozing off the fire. Now, while all of this was happening, the guy in white kurta pajama very silkily just escaped from the entire scene, and stood there was the man who was initially stoking the tandoor fire. But anyways, the police were successful again for the second time in dozing off the fire. But this time when they do come close to the tandoor, and that is when they realize it was not just the party posters or banners or plywoods they were burning. There was something else on the tandoor, I would say, and that was a human body in a fetal position. And immediately, all the eyes panned towards Keshav Kumar, the man who was initially stoking the fire, the man who was the manager of Bagya restaurant. Now, there, right in front of them, was the tandoor in a makeshift pyre condition, and there was a body on that pyre that they were trying to burn, or I would rather say dispose of. Now, immediately, Keshav is held under police custody. He is being questioned by the police, and that is when the police also noticed that his clothes were blood stained. While they were questioning him, they do realize that he is not the prime suspect. He was only helping or assisting the prime suspect in disposing of the body by burning it down. And that prime suspect was none other than the guy in the white kurta pajama, Sushil Sharma, the ex-president of Delhi Pradesh Youth Congress. Sushil Sharma was also Keshav Kumar's boss. He not really owned the restaurant, but he had a certain sort of contract from the Indian government to run it. So, further into the questioning with Keshav, he discloses that the same night of 2nd of July 1995, Sushil comes to the restaurant in his white car and he immediately orders him to ask everybody in the restaurant to leave, also the guests who were right in the middle of having their food. Now, after Keshav ensured that everybody had left, he helped Sushil drag a really heavy black plastic bag from his white Maruti car. Now, after that, Sushil confessed to him that he had murdered somebody and he needed Keshav's help to dispose of the body. Now, with the help of Sushil, Keshav actually built a makeshift pyre on the tandoor. They were using a lot of plastics, a lot of paper, cardboard, and wooden planks to burn the body off. They were using a lot of butter and ghee also to fuel the fire. So much so that at one point they were short of butter and ghee, and Keshav had to go to the market to buy 2 blocks of extra butter to fuel the fire. Now, while Keshav was relaying the entire incidents to the police, the big question was, where was Sushil Sharma? So the police immediately went to Sushil Sharma's parents' house. And there they found out that the parents believed that Sushil was in Chandigarh for the past few days and they were completely unaware of what their son had done. They were also looking for Sushil's car, the white Maruti car, which they would eventually find on 4th of July in Malcha Marg market. Now, simultaneously, Keshav was opening a bit in front of the police officers. He was not really taking Sushil's name directly, but he confessed that he believed that the body was of none other than but Sushil's wife, Ravi Naina Sahni. Now, Ravi Naina Sahni met Sushil Sharma back in their college days when they were both politically involved with DPYC, that is Delhi Pradesh Youth Congress. Now, at the time, Sushil was the president of DPYC, whereas Naina was serving as a general secretary in the board. That is when they met each other, they fell in love, and they secretly married. So secret that nobody knew about their marriage apart from their parents. Now, they were together living in a flat in Mandir Marg. Now, the moment they found out about the address, they immediately rushed to the apartment. And that apartment was a perfect example of a crime scene. There was a lot of blood stains on the wall. There was blood on the floor and on the carpet. They were able to retrieve some bullet shells, an air pistol gun, and at the same time, a lot of other evidences that directly proved that Sushil Sharma had shot his wife right there in their marital home. After this, the police officers immediately informed Naina's family. The parents, the two brothers, and also a sister in law came to the apartment and they confirmed that the apartment definitely belonged to Sushil and Naina and they were living there after their marriage. Now, when they looked at the scene, they were weeping and they were crying, but at the same time, they were not willing to accept that any sort of foul play would have happened with their daughter. Now, after that, the family was also taken to the mortuary where Naina's body, the charred body, was kept. Now, the moment the family saw the body, they immediately started howling and weeping and crying. The police were a little relieved. They were like, okay, now that they have seen the body, they would accept and identify the body to be of Naina's, but they were wrong. The family, even though they were crying, even though they were weeping, they would not just accept that the body was of Naina's. I mean, one would say that the body was so charred that they were not able to identify or they were not able to recognize it. But there were so many other evidences that directly proved that the body was Naina's. The condition of the apartment, the anklets that the police showed to Naina's sister-in-law, who responded by saying that though the anklets looked very familiar and similar to what Naina wore, it still wasn't hers. The family was just refusing to positively identify the body, and all of this was very frustrating for the police officer because it was acting as an obstruction for their police investigation. Now, to be very honest, I'm quite unsure why they were not recognizing or identifying or willing to identify the body to be of their daughters. Now, maybe the folks were scared of Sushil. They knew about his political connections and maybe they were scared that he would get hurt if they go against him. In fact, they went on even saying that if Sushil agrees and identifies the body to be of Naina's, they would blindly trust him and they would accept the same. Or maybe they were just in denial. They just didn't want it to accept that they have lost their Naina. And they were hanging by a thin strand of hope that maybe at any time Naina would come back from the Himalayas. Now, the police over here were really annoyed. They knew that it was Naina Sani's body, but they had no evidence to prove that it was Naina Sani's body. But to their rescue comes Matloob Karim. Now, Matloob Karim comes to the mortuary, and just by looking at once at the body, he positively identifies that the body was of Ravi Nainasani. Now, this is completely strange because in a room full of family and folks, nobody identifies the charred body, but there comes a stranger to everyone who, just by looking at Naina's body, identifies that it was definitely hers. So the question comes, who was Matloob Karim? Now, Matloob Karim was running in the same circle as Sushil and Naina. While Sushil was the president of DPYC and Naina was a general secretary, Matloob Karim was also serving as a general secretary of DPYC's board. Now, it is said that apparently before being in a relationship with Sushil, Naina was actually in a relationship with Matloob Karim for almost 6 years. And the reason why they broke off is because they belonged to two different faiths and their family wouldn't have accepted either of them. But even after breaking up with each other and after Naina moved on with Sushil Sharma and Matloob married somebody from his own faith, they were still in touch with each other, which really poked Sushil. Now, Matloob also told the policemen that he never really liked Sushil. He was known in the circles for being very aggressive and quite a rigid man. But anywho, Naina still goes on and marries him in secret. Matloob also confides to the police officers that in the recent months, their relationship had deteriorated a lot. In fact, it became something very toxic and violent. Sushil completely snatched away Naina's freedom. He would keep tabs on what she was doing, whom she was talking to. In fact, the house help was also asked to keep an eye on her and to tell Sushil about all the things that she was doing throughout the day. She was restricted to her own marital home. And all of this was claustrophobic to Naina because she was an ambitious woman. She had a lot of dreams and goals in her life to do. At a very young age, she had achieved a lot of things. She was a general secretary in DPYC. She was running a boutique. She also had a pilot's license, which, according to some articles, was funded by the former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So, anyways, the relationship, the marriage was toxic. There was a lot of violence involved. Sushil would often suspect that Naina was having multiple affairs. All the while, Sushil was having an affair on his side with some South Delhi socialite. Imagine the amount of hypocrisy involved in this scenario. So, anyways, what happened on 2nd of July is that around 7 p.m., Naina pours herself her favorite drink, Bloody Mary. She calls a local vendor to order some 2 film cassettes. So that meant that she was planning on having a nice evening watching some films. Now, after calling the vendor, she rings up Matlub Kareem. She inquires about her Australian visa. So, by the way, what was happening is that she was taking help from Matlub Kareem. She had applied for an Australian visa. She was planning of running away from Sushil. She believed that it was her only way out of this toxic relationship. She couldn't have gone back to her parents, or at least that's what she believed, that she couldn't go back to her parents because she had married to Sushil against their wishes. She also feared that she couldn't take the help of the police because of his obvious political connections. So the only way out for her was to leave the country and settle down in a new country altogether. And that is when she was taking help from Matlub Kareem. Now, Matlub told her on the call that it would take a couple of more days for him to get the visa, and she hangs up. Now, around 8:15 p.m., Sushil comes back home. Naina pours him a drink, and as usual, Sushil picks up the telephone and redials. This was his normal routine now for the past few months, ever since his entire suspicion of infidelity was on its peak. Now, unfortunately, that day, the last call was to Matlub Kareem. So when Sushil picks up the telephone and redials, he hears Matlub Kareem's voice and he snaps. He just loses his temper. He immediately puts the telephone down and rushes to the bedroom where Naina was. He asks her whom she was talking with, and Naina replies very courtly by saying that it's none of your business, why do you ask? And that was like adding fuel to his fire of rage. He immediately takes out his gun and he shoots point blank thrice at Naina. Two out of these bullets hits her on her skull and her neck, and the third one hits the plywood over the window AC, as it was also seen by the police officers when they came over to the apartment. She immediately dies. Sushil enters a state of panic. He realizes what he's done in that 1 minute of rage, and he starts panicking. He doesn't know how to dispose of the body. He could have been civil by going to the police and confessing his crime, but he decided not to do so. What he did was that he wrapped her body in a black polythene and he decides to dispose of the body from a bridge to Yamuna River. But then when he comes to the bridge of the Yamuna River, he realizes that there was intense traffic, which was quite usual. He takes a couple of laps, he's waiting for a secluded spot, he's waiting for the traffic to go lighter, but it was just not his day and he did not have enough time. All of a sudden, he thinks of the tandoor at Bagya Barbecue and he drives towards it. And then what happened in the restaurant is all history. But what we don't know about yet is, where did Sushil go from the Bagya Barbecue restaurant after he sneaked away in between tons of police officers? What he does is he takes his car, his white Maruti car, to his apartment back in Mandir Marg. He tries to remove all sort of traces like of blood stains from the apartment, but he did not really have a lot of time, right? So what he does is he leaves everything behind. He packs a suitcase with new set of clothes. He also packs the white kurta pajama which had Naina's blood stains on him. And then with around 2.5 lakh rupees of cash in hand, he drives off to Gujarat Bhavan to meet his friend and IS officer DK Rao. Now this was around 1:30 a.m. in the morning, so obviously IS officer DK Rao is quite suspicious and he asks his friend like what he was doing at this point of time. To which Sushil tells him that, oh, he just had some sort of a fight with his wife and he needs to relax. He definitely did not care to elaborate on the fight with the wife. But anyways, the next morning, DK Rao had to leave for Ahmedabad, and before leaving, as requested by Sushil, he booked the room under Sushil's friend's name, that was Jay Prakash. Now, after DK Rao leaves, immediately around 7 a.m. on 3rd of July's morning, Sushil dials up his friend Jay Prakash. He tells him about the entire escapade. He also tells him that the room he was living in was under his name. Obviously, Jay Prakash did not take it well. I mean, imagine your friend does something nasty and they end up using your name. Never do that. I'm not your friend, definitely not. But anyways, back to the case. With the help of Jay Prakash, he was trying to dispose of his car. He also calls his business associate slash partner of Bagya Barbecue Restaurant, Ram Prakash Sachdeva. He confesses to him on the phone, and on his way, while he was disposing of the car with his friend Jay Prakash, he goes to Ram Prakash's house. Now, when he comes to Ram Prakash's house, Ram Prakash had already been informed of what had happened at the restaurant, because obviously he's the owner, so he would be informed of what was happening over there, right? He also gets a call while Sushil was relaying about the entire incident of how he shot his wife and tried to dispose of the body. Ram Prakash gets a call from the police, and he's been asked to report to Connaught Place police station for questioning and interrogation. Him being a loyal friend did not disclose to the police that Sushil was sitting right there in his living room. And with the help of his friend Jay Prakash and Ram Prakash Sachdeva, Sushil Sharma escapes out from Delhi. Now, straight from this date to 7th of July, that is when the police find out about Sushil Sharma's location. He had actually gotten an interim anticipatory bail from Madras, that is currently Chennai. Now, when Delhi police got to know about this information, they immediately started their proceedings to get him back to Delhi from Madras. But they were quite unaware of that actually he was no more in Madras. He was actually traveling to Karnataka with his lawyer, and he petitions to surrender in a court. The judge in the court rejects his petition, which was a very wise thing to do, because obviously Sushil Sharma wanted to be in a judicial custody rather than a police custody for obvious reasons. He wanted to basically escape from all sort of torture of a police interrogation. So, anyways, now we would expect from this wise judge to call up the Delhi police and inform them about Sushil Sharma, but that's not what he does. He completely ignores him. He rejects his petition and he asks him to go back and be a free man on the street. But Sushil was not going to do that. He actually wanted to protect himself by surrendering to a different state's police or judicial system. Now, after several rejections, he was finally scouted by a police officer of a local rural village. Now, this police officer maybe accepted his petition of surrender because he wanted a minute of fame. God knows what the reason was, but anyways, wasn't much helpful. Now, when the Delhi police found about this, they immediately came to Karnataka, and after a really lengthy and rigorous proceedings, they were finally able to get full custody of Sushil Sharma. Now, the Delhi police had a lot of time in hand from his travel from Karnataka to Delhi. They were not going to let this time waste. They were going to interrogate him, they were going to question him before they present him in front of the court. Now, during these questionings, he did confess. I would say he did agree to his wrongdoings. They also took him to the mortuary where Naina's body was kept. Now, the moment Sushil saw Naina's body, he was crying and howling in regret. Now, the police felt like, okay, he's accepted that he's killed his wife, but they would soon realize that nothing that Sushil would say could be taken at face value. The very next day, when he was presented to the court, he completely refused or denied anything and everything in the court. In fact, he also refused to believe that the body was actually of Naina's. I mean, imagine just the other day you were crying right next to her body, and today in the court you are saying that the body is not of Naina's. I mean, that has to be some sort of polarity. But anyway, circumstantially, if you look at this case, there was everything. The jigsaw fit well, but the court needs evidence. Now, this is when the tricky part comes of this case. I mean, we have not yet reached there. Now, this case apparently became one of the cases which had India's a lot of firsts. Now, for example, this case was the first case in India where two postmortems were done or two autopsies were done. Reason being, the first autopsy report or the postmortem report was a little problematic. A little problematic. so little that it was completely ambiguous. It had many discrepancies. Now, for instance, the cause of death, according to the first postmortem report, was a hemorrhagic shock. Now, that was very generic. The report did not specify what kind of ante-mortem injuries would have led to that kind of a hemorrhagic shock. Over the top, the report also excluded any possibility of firearm injuries. Now, imagine there were bullet shells and there were bullet marks, blood stains found from their apartment, from Naina and Sushil's apartment. And the postmortem report over here clearly specifies that there were no firearm injuries. And the reason why the doctor concluded this was because he did not conduct an X-ray on the body. Now, eventually, the police would find out that the reason why he did not conduct an X-ray was because the X-ray machine of the hospital wasn't working. Now, another thing that the postmortem report specified that the limbs were amputated, but again, it lacked any sort of evidence. It did not specify the nature of the instrument that was used to amputate the limbs. And it also made a very dubious statement, a statement that was bewildering, if you ask me, to be honest. The postmortem report also made a very dubious statement that indicated that Naina was alive while she was being burned because there was presence of soot in her respiratory tract. Now, thankfully, the government also saw the discrepancies and ambiguity in this postmortem report and immediately sanctioned for a second autopsy. Now, when the second autopsy report came, it was a true relief to the police because it was completely aligning with their circumstantial evidence. By the way, I forgot to miss out a point. The doctor who conducted the first autopsy report, when he actually made the entire report, he did not go to the police officers first or to the judiciary first. He actually went to the media and he disclosed the facts, breaching all sort of ethics and norms to the media. Anyways, back to the second postmortem. The cause of death, as per the second postmortem report, was because of coma, consequently because of firearm injuries. The postmortem also reported presence of two metal pieces inside her body. They were also able to retrieve a deformed bullet. Now, this point would have been covered in the first autopsy only if they would have done the X-ray, which they definitely not. And also regarding the soot that apparently they had found in the first postmortem was actually discoloration in the respiratory tract due to decomposition of the body. Now, another first in this case was DNA testing. This was the first case where DNA testing was done to identify the body, and it was concluded that the body definitely belonged to Naina's parents' offspring, that is, Naina's, indeed. Now, with all of this information and evidences, when Sushil was taken to the court, he would still not agree or he would still not confess in front of the court of his crimes. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if it is unfortunate or not, but definitely for in cases such as this, according to Indian law, if a criminal accepts or confesses to his crime in front of the police during the police interrogation, it is not taken up as an evidence in front of a judge in a court. So obviously, when Sushil went in front of the court, even though he did accept in front of the police officers that yes, he did shoot his wife, he would completely deny it. He would also use the first autopsy report by saying that I actually did not shoot her. I had hit her in that moment of rage on her head, and that is how she ended up dying. He would also completely deny accepting that the body belonged to Naina. But anyways, the police and the law had sufficient information and evidence to prove that he did shoot Naina, and he definitely dragged her body to Bagya barbecue and tried to dispose her of by burning her on the tandoor. He was finally convicted of his crimes, and a district court in Delhi sentenced him to death by hanging. He did appeal it to High Court, but the High Court upheld the district court's decision. In 2013, Sushil appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court commuted his death by hanging to life imprisonment on grounds such as that the crime was committed not against the society. Sushil was not a threat to the society, and he had committed this crime due to a personal strained relationship with his wife. Eventually, in December 2018, Delhi High Court ordered immediate release of Sushil Sharma after he served 23 years in jail. The reason being he was a well-disciplined religious man inside the jail and he had repented for his crime enough. In an interview he did after he was released from the jail, he stated that every day for the past 23 years while he was serving his life imprisonment in the jail, he repented his actions. He repented what he did to his wife. Eventually, he also said that if there was a concept of marriage counseling back in his days, then he wouldn't have done what he did to his wife. And it is said that he's working as a marriage counselor these days because he doesn't want the mistakes that he did other people to do. And quote unquote, he believes that a problem comes when a man is in love with his wife and then comes physical intimacy that leads to higher expectations. He believes that a man should always love his kids and just respect his wife. Higher expectation kills marriage. Quite an irony, I would say. I don't know how good of a marriage counselor he is, but I would definitely not recommend anyone going there. I mean, you should always love your wife. You should always love and respect your wife. Period. That. Anyways, that was about the Tandoor Khan case. And one thing I would address before ending this video is that, a lot of times when we are discussing about such crimes, such cases, we end up just talking about the crime, what happened, who did it, how he tried to cover it up or she tried to cover it up, and what happened after that. In all of this story, we tend to forget about that person who lost their life. We forget about people like Naina Sahni. While I was doing my research, I also found out that after the entire police investigation was completed and came the time for Naina's cremation, the family refused to do her final rituals. Eventually, a lot of NGOs volunteered to do her final rituals. Also came in the infamous bandit queen, Phulan Devi. She also volunteered to do Naina Sahani's final ritual, but the police didn't wanted that. I mean, it is just so hurtful and sad to hear that somebody who had been, she was never accepted by her family because of her modern thoughts and her way of modern living. Her lifestyle was quite different from theirs. The family never accepted her because she went against their wishes and married someone out of their faith. And at the same time, the husband whom she went against her family for ended up murdering her. And even after she died, the folks in the family were not willing to accept that it was her. They were not willing to identify her. They were not willing to cremate her. It just breaks my heart thinking of Naina. But thankfully, in the end, the police officers were successful in persuading Naina's sister and brother-in-law to do the final rituals. And the thing is that this case had been called a rarest of a rare case, where the prime minister at the time had to actually intervene. So anyways, that was quite an intense case to talk about. I feel very tired and drained out emotionally and mentally, especially while thinking about Naina and what happened to her and her dreams and how she just didn't have love, I feel. So yeah, that 1 minute of rage, 1 minute of rage, and it took away lives of two people, of Sushil Sharma. He lost his political career, though I'm not sympathizing or empathizing with him in any possible way. All I'm thinking about is Naina. She was a bright, bright woman, a very inspiring one. She had a brave heart. She knew what she wanted and she was willing to fight for it. She fought for Sushil against her family. She fought for her dreams. She was fighting for her dreams against Sushil and everybody in the odds. So that's all for the day. I hope that we had some sort of learning. And one thing I do agree with Sushil is that marriage counseling is very important. Any sort of counseling is very important. So if you need help, go seek it. If you need someone to talk to, if you don't have anyone, you have me. You can reach out to me on my Instagram. You can message me here as well. And that's all for the day. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Good night.